Thank you very much for coming, as I mentioned earlier. At the end of every session, we finish off with a little bit that we call the team talk, football related, you see what I mean? Team talk. When I first introduced it, it was actually called the 10-minute team talk. Within a few months, I renamed it because I suddenly realised that people can't talk for 10 minutes. And then, what people tend to do, a lot of people, and I haven't done one today, but a lot of people bring presentations with them, you know, PowerPoint or whatever, which is great because it's visual and it's stuff that you can see. But obviously, sometimes people get asked questions along the way and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden you realise that 10 minutes becomes 15 minutes, becomes 20 minutes. So yeah, I soon dropped the 10-minute bit, because I thought, actually, if I do a team talk, if someone goes over and it's 15 minutes or whatever, that's fine, as long as we're not all sat there for 45 minutes and everyone's looking at their watches going, I thought this finished at 2. So yeah, anyway, I've been running this for a couple of years now, and this is the first time I've actually done a team talk. I've always allowed other people in the room to do it, and I just thought, do you know what? I did ask someone, I think it was you guys I asked originally, didn't I? I said, do you want to do a team talk? They were like, no, that's fine. And then I thought, you know what? I'll do it myself. I'll do it myself, because I've never done one. And I have filled in the past, and I've sort of done a little bit of padding, and it was always to do with networking and non-lead networking. I've never actually done a talk on what I do for a living, which is manage print. So what I wanted to do was just very briefly, just talk a little bit about what I do for a living. And it's not very exciting. A lot of people go on photocopiers, it's all very boring. The whole point of a team talk was it's not a sales pitch, so I'm not here to try and sell you Dolphin Tech as a business or me as a person. The whole point of the team talk originally was to give people little bits of advice or little nuggets of information that they might find useful. Now obviously, what I do for a living isn't for everyone in here. There are some of you that are self-employed, there are some of you that run your own businesses, so you might not need any of the, the products that I sell or whatever, but for those of you that work in bigger businesses or have got lots of staff that you employ or run companies or whatever, then a lot of it is quite useful. So just a very brief background on myself. I've been in this industry now for 15 years or so. We've just been talking over there actually. I used to work with Roz in a totally different industry. So I've actually worked in sales for a long time, probably well over 20 years, and I've worked in a couple of different industries before that, including travel, including health and fitness. And then I actually moved into the technology industry about 15 years or so ago. I've worked in managed print for about 4 or 5 different businesses over that period. I've started with a small local business, which is very much what I'm doing now, and I've worked in the corporate arena. So I've worked in Birmingham, dealing with big companies on a corporate scale. So I've sort of got various different levels of experience in this industry. The one thing that I wanted to talk about, like I said, not myself and not a sales pitch, was about the sort of shady sort of perception that people have got about the photocopier industry and the print industry. And some of you might not know anything about it, some of you may be aware of it. The industry itself, probably in the 90s or so, had a little bit of a bad reputation, probably a bit like double glazing salesman or second-hand car salesman. It was all very much the shady, dodgy contracts, people being tied in for long-term periods, people paying extortionate amounts of money. And then back in probably the 90s really, when it was sort of in its heyday, there was a lot of stuff on the news about it, and it was all very dodgy. Now, I'd like to think the industry's cleaned up a lot now. However, I've been in it a long time, and some of the stories I hear about companies and businesses being tied into ridiculous contracts and stuff like that, I mean, it's still about now. So I just want to give you a couple of examples of things really just to look out for and not fall into the trap of. And weirdly, I actually went to see one of my old customers yesterday, and it sort of ties in very nicely because I don't want to teach everyone to suck eggs here because you're all fairly intelligent people, but one of the most important things, if you're going to enter into any sort of managed print contract or managed service contract, is ultimately A, ask a lot of questions, and B, read the small print. those are the two biggest things. So for example, a customer that I was speaking to the other day, or a former customer of mine that I was speaking to the other day, is currently in a contract with a service provider, such as ourselves, who provide equipment to them. However, the notice period on that contract is 6 months, so they have to give 6 months notice to end the contract. However, if they don't give notice before that 6-month period, and they get within the 6-month notice period, that contract then rolls for another 12 months. Okay, so ultimately, their contract ends in August. They have to give notice by February that year with a 6-month notice period. If they don't, that contract will then run until August the following year. So ultimately, they're tied in for another 18 months. Now, this is something that's standard. It's in the T's and C's, but customers sign into it without realising. Now, you might not think, well, that's not really a major issue. It is when you consider that the finance agreement for the equipment only requires a 90-day notice period. So if they're in a contract with a finance company, and anyone that does financing, whether it's car financing or anything, it's a similar thing. But when people have these types of machines in their offices, they normally sign a lease contract, a finance contract. To end that contract period at the minimum term is 90 days. So when they come to the end of their contract, they only have to give a quarter's notice to end it. But by this point, their service contract is already within that 6-month notice period. So if they want to end the service contract and the finance contract at the same time, they would have to give notice on the service contract 3 months before the finance contract. Does that make sense? Which no one ever does, because a lot of the time, no companies know that they have to do that. So by the time their finance contract is coming to an end, they go to give notice on it, but they've already tied themselves into another 12-month contract on the service. So it's a really sneaky way of working, and it's great for the service provider because they're like, we got another 12 months service out of it. But ultimately for the customer, who are the most important people, it's a nightmare. Because then all of a sudden, if they want to get out of that contract, they can't, because legally they've signed a contract that says it's going to roll for another 12 months. So it's contracts like that, and it's sort of those tactics that give the industry a bit of a bad name, because all of a sudden then, if someone wants to end a contract, they can't, they're tied in for another 12 months. So when I'm saying to you about, reading the small print and things like that, that's one of the most important things. Another thing that sort of happens again in the industry, which is something to look out for, is if you're ever offered an inclusive contract, so a print inclusive contract, a copy inclusive contract, these sorts of things, again, they're quite rife in the industry and they sound great. Well, if you've got a really good salesman who is giving you it's fantastic, you get your copies included, your prints included, you've got one bill. It's a little bit like, you think about your mobile phone contract. So I'm pretty much guaranteed that most of you have got a mobile phone contract here that's got inclusive minutes, inclusive text, and it's great. Sounds like a great deal, but actually sometimes if you drill down into how much you actually use your phone, how many texts you're sending, how many minutes you're using, sometimes the offer's not that great when you really drill down into it. And it's a similar thing with copy or print inclusive contracts. Sometimes the company will say to you, look, we'll give you 1,000 colour copies, 1,000 mono copies included in the contract, so you'll never have to pay for it. It's all fantastic, and a lot of people sign into it and think, yeah, great. If you actually drill down into how many prints your business does, black and white prints, colour prints, etc., and then break it down as to how much that would have cost you if you paid for it separately compared to the cost of it all thrown in together, sometimes it's actually a lot more expensive than what you think. And again, another conversation I've had recently with a school. The school were tied into a contract again for another 18 months or so, and they're paying ridiculous amounts of money. Like, literally, they're paying something like £2,000 a quarter. Now, I said to them, so how many prints does that include? Well, it includes 10,000 colour and 10,000 mono. And I'm like, but are you using 10,000 colour and 10,000 mono? Are you actually printing that much? No idea. So what you'll find is with a lot of these copy inclusive contracts, copies don't roll over. So if the company or the school do not print 10,000 colour copies or 10,000 black and white copies, if they don't actually use that quota doesn't roll over. So ultimately they're paying for prints that they're never actually using. So they're paying a massive amount of money when they really don't need to be paying it. And then finally, because I'm trying to nail this as quick as I can, there used to be a company, again, a long time ago, probably back in the 90s, they don't exist anymore, but they did a thing called, I think it was evergreen contracts, I think they were called, and obviously the name gives it away. So it's ultimately a contract that you can never get out of because it just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling. And there are various different stipulations in that. I don't know the ins and outs of it or how it worked, but again, it's one of those things, and they always targeted public sector, so NHS, hospitals, people like that, and obviously schools, universities, anyone that had public money or anything like that were a prime target for it. And the biggest thing I can offer people as advice really is just like I said, don't want to teach you all subjects, but it's due diligence. So just making sure that at the point of sale, when you're talking to someone like me, an account manager, a salesperson, whatever, you're asking those questions. How much is it going to cost me? What am I paying for? Are there any extra charges? How can I get out of the contract? What's the notice period like? Does that include everything? Does that price you show me include everything? Are there any extras I need to be aware of? All of those questions are things that you should be asking, because 9 times out of 10, you don't always get a nice, genuine salesperson like me that'll be honest with you. Sometimes people are into it to make as much money as they can, and that's fine. Everyone's in business to make money, we get that. But, you know, there are a lot of Wolf of Wall Street wannabes out there that, you know, salesmen that want to be multi-rich. And the industry that I'm in, not so much now because it's a lot more regulated now, but back in the day, there were a lot of photocopier salesmen that were earning £500,000 a year, ridiculous amounts of money because of the contracts they were tying people into. Like I said, a bit more regulated now and there's less of it about, but it is stuff that still goes on. I went to see one of my old customers yesterday who was still with the original supplier that I used to work for. They've never changed the equipment, ever. So it's still the same equipment that they had in when I was there. Now this machine they've got in at the minute is well over 10 years old. It's discontinued now, they don't even make them anymore, and they're still paying the same contract. That contract I worked out based on what they were spending, and I've literally done this quote this morning before I came here. They're spending about £800 a quarter. I've just given her a quote now to put 2 brand new machines in to replace the one and a brand new contract, and it's saving them over £200 a quarter, and that's for 2 brand new machines for the cost of what they're spending on one at the minute. So it just goes to show that, you know, technology moves on, prices get cheaper, deals change, etc, etc. But it's just something that's worth reviewing. Every time I stand up and talk about managed print, a lot of people are sort of unsure what it is. A lot of people still think printing is, you know, well, we do the printing for you. No, that's not it. We're not a printer. We don't do commercial printing. There are commercial printers that come in. We are a managed print and a managed service provider. So what we do is we supply equipment to your business, and then we supply maintenance contracts, toners, inks, etc. on that sort of basis. And the way we work is very black and white. You've got a finance lease for the equipment if you want to finance it, and then you get charged for the amount of prints you do, scans you do, etc. And it's very black and white. So we tend not to do inclusive contracts for the reasons that I just talked about. They can be very sort of smoke and mirrors and hit and miss, and we like to be sort of straight down the line with people. But all I wanted to do today was just talk to you about a couple of things just to look out for. So if you ever are considering entering into a managed print contract or anything like that, just be sure to ask those questions that I've been asking, and like I said, read the small print and make sure you know notice periods and stuff like that so you're not tying yourself into anything stupid. That was it. Thanks very much. That's my team talk done. Nailed that in about 10 minutes.